You don't have to be perfect to communicate. Hi, I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefing's Copywriting Tips. At times, I talk too fast, I slur words, I sometimes stop in the middle of a sentence and completely lose track of where I am. I'm mostly dysfunctional when it comes to communications, yet I'm still able to communicate. How is this possible? Well, for those of you that know me in person, I'm not really as social in person as I am online, as I'm doing podcasts and other events. And then even when I do podcasts, there's a level of anxiety associated with sitting down and talking about a topic that I forcefully do things so that I can get through it. Let me explain. First off, you may not be a natural speaker, and that's why you've chose copywriting or marketing through print materials or mediums, not mediums like in psychics, but medium as in internet, email, audio, video. And when you get in front of the camera, you find yourself stuck, frozen, not sure what to say. Well, in the beginning, and if I listen to my older audio materials, they make me nauseous because I find out how poorly I communicated in the past. Now, today, I consider myself an average communicator. I sincerely try to deliver to you insights and knowledge that you can apply right now to get some results. And I'm going to give you some points here that help you communicate better. But I want to share with you that no matter how well you think I communicate, it's not as good as I think it could be. So, for example, I'm writing an article here about being more appreciated. So the feeling of having other people recognize what you do and who you are, and how do you stimulate your customer lists so that they appreciate who you are and what you do. Now, you may say, well, that sounds a little selfish. Well, in order for a customer to buy, they need to know, like, and trust you. So what are some of the things you can do in order for them to know, like, and trust you in a sincere and meaningful way? Well, I wrote the original article after doing a podcast. The article was in draft, and I read through it, and I realized that I had transposed characters and words. I had misspelling. I had poor grammar, and if I read the draft out loud, it was difficult to read. Well, this is important because if it's difficult for me, the person who wrote the article, then it's difficult for my readers. And so I took it to the Hemingway app. I went to the Hemingway editor and I cleaned it up. And now I'm in Grammarly, and it still has more areas to clean up. Now when I read the words, they sound clear and easy to follow. This is important. Your first drafts are always going to be first drafts. They're just going to be getting the ideas out of your brain onto paper. Sometimes I use outlines, and you can find the outlines work. I also, when I'm recording, I on purpose pace myself. I use gestures. Even though I'm talking to my phone here, I'm using gestures. I'm smiling. I'm lifting up my face and smiling so I can have a wide open mouth to have a better voice, because sometimes I speak a little nasally and I don't realize it. Now, that's because my nose stuffs up. Anyway, one thing that I found that helps communication is being willing to get the words out in a simple way, kind of like you're doing an outline, and then follow in behind it with the details necessary to finish off the presentation. So using paragraphs instead of sentences. And that came from my parents saying that if you're going to answer a question, you need to answer it in a complete sentence. And I know that sentences are just fragments of larger ideas, and the paragraph itself brings all that together. So if I'm going to answer a question, I want to answer it who, what, when, where, and why. I want to follow that pattern to make sure I cover all of the relevant points. Another tip is to have a pause button and always some water nearby, because I was about to cough. And I pushed the pause button, took a little drink of water, caught my breath, it's called a reset, and then started over again. You see, you don't have to be perfect to communicate in order to get your message across. And in fact, I've been doing this for probably more than 20 years now, and I've gotten better along the way. Now, I noticed that even today, I'm still not the greatest. I might have a semicolon in the wrong place or comma in the wrong place, but ultimately you can get an editor for that. That's a really low pay deal. What is the high value activity is actually creating relevant content that matches your audience's needs and delivering it in such a way that it's hearable. So for example, I'm conveying to you my fears and concerns and sometimes my frustrations when I'm trying to communicate. I'm constantly working on those things, and I have a few tips or tricks that I use in order to make my communications more interesting. So for example, I'm really acting excited about what I'm doing here, but in real life, I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I have hyposomnia. I'm exhausted all the time for some reason. But what I have to deliver in the audio, and because the audio is here forever, is a message that is clear, easy to follow, it has clear enunciation, and as the listener is somewhat interesting. So I want you thinking about what is he going to say next. So if I have a quip or a quirk or something that goes wrong, I simply roll with those punches. I might pause and collect my thought, and then ultimately deliver my message. Now, I don't think about when I edit this, I'm going to realize, oh my gosh, actually, this is mostly unedited when it's out on Spreaker. But when I edit, I am going to find the points where I paused or I stumbled or I stuttered or something else. I'm not too concerned about that. And I have to, in my own mind, set that aside. So that's what I'm saying to you. Now, I learned a lot in Toastmasters to be able to do quick presentations in front of people. And I learned a lot in just everyday practice, actually recording my presentations and then listening to them back. There's a couple elements of posture. So I am making sure that I have open chest. So I don't know if you can tell the difference between the voice here and the voice here. The voice here is upright and the voice down here is kind of bent over. So I'm minding my posture. And the reason I'm telling you all this and walking you through these steps and sharing with you some of the insecurities I have in speaking, because you can't do this kind of editing when you're having a conversation with somebody. You can't do this kind of readjusting posture and pacing the room in order to get the energy in the presentation when you're talking one-on-one. But ultimately, you can improve your speaking skills and communicate messages to your clients in a hearable way following just some simple tips and ideas that I've shared today. It doesn't mean that you're going to be ever perfect at speaking. And I would argue that your audience doesn't want you perfect. Because if you're too good at something, I remember when President Obama was running for office, there was a number of complaints that he was too polished of a speaker. And his speeches immediately went down the toilet afterwards. In fact, he sounded educated. He sounded like he understood the concepts and the problems. And he went from that to just complete gibberish, but he was connecting with people. So at my level, I was understanding what he was saying and it was appealing, but their contingency or their market survey told him that folks were having trouble trusting him because he sounded too professional. Well, you need to know these things. There are audiences that you might be writing for where if you use scientific language, you might upset the audience and they won't listen. So it's not that President Obama was unclear when he had a very paced and larger word vocabulary. It's just his audience didn't connect with him and trust him with that language. Now, what I find is the best thing to do is to be yourself. So even though I have these frustrations and the little nervous tics when it comes to creating materials, and I have to remind myself to breathe and slow down a little bit, I still am able to produce enough quality materials for the audience that I care about. So a lot of the people that I work with are high-income professionals and entrepreneurs. They have similar challenges or have had similar challenges in the past. They might stutter. They might be from a scientific background and they have trouble communicating with the normal people. I got not a reprimand, but I got taken aside by a supervisor once that asked me to stop using big words because it wasn't important how smart people thought I was. And I was like, excuse me? And now he didn't know that I listened to vocabulary tapes and it was a hobby of mine to learn new words, but the people I was talking to understood the words I was sharing. And in fact, it was a vocabulary at the level which most everybody else was speaking, except for this manager. And unfortunately, this manager felt threatened by and we talk about this in another newsletter of mine, about the language patterns I was using that were mirroring other folks that he wanted to be peers with but wasn't accepted. And it could be because his language was not at their level of language. It doesn't matter if that level's high or low. The people didn't recognize the speech patterns. Or if someone has an accent, they can sometimes be not discriminated against, but sometimes not be trusted because there's a difference. However, this manager had the nerve to tell me to stop using big words. And I didn't understand at the time what was going on. In hindsight, I kind of have an idea what was going on. But ultimately, are you using language that's relevant, meaningful, and has value to your audience? So to be honest, some people are just completely turned off by my pacing or my that thinking thing. It just happened. Do you see that? Where I'm going into the top of my mind and drawing out the words because the word is on the tip of my tongue, but it's not coming out of my mouth. And so I have this sing song or this just break in my mental thought. But again, you be you, because that's what you're going to be best at. But when you're writing copy for your clients, you need to remember what is their audience. What is the language their audience presents? What is the language their audience trusts? Now that means if you have a doctor who's the article or the letter is being written by a doctor, you need to make them sound like a doctor, even on paper. If they're a normal person, an everyday type of person, you need to use everyday type of language. And this is extremely important. So I've covered two things here. One is that when you're communicating with clients, don't worry so much about how you do it. The context and the content is more important. So it may be better to ask questions rather than to make statements all the time. You might ask them when you were speaking with others, what languages and what vocabulary do you use with your audience? And what vocabulary and language do you find works best with that audience? It may be something from a physiology perspective to help you speak more clearly and more accurately, especially when you're doing audio recordings. I see a lot of folks that have little clicks that distract. We want to try to reduce the distractions, even if it means changing a little bit about how you speak so that you might be more clear. Because personally, I don't like it when my nose stuff's all up and I can't understand myself. Or when I listen back to the audio and I slur some words. Now, some of these things you can't handle it. I had a stroke when I was 22, and sometimes I do slur words because that's just what's going on in the brain. But a long story short, and to transition to the conclusion, figure out what it is for you that matters. So I've worked with some speakers that had to wear a suit and tie when speaking in front of an audience. They couldn't casually speak to an audience. They had to get out there with authority. They had to get out there with a posture and a position that they were the ones that had every right in the world to be up there and speak. And that's appropriate for a lot of audiences. In other cases, the folks I was working with, they wanted to sit with the audience. They wanted to come down and get close with the audience and really have a conversation with people. Even though everybody's listening in because they're mic'd up, they want to have a conversation with people and really get down there and talk about their situation. I like to watch TV evangelists and see how that they present themselves. Some TV evangelists are really, fire and brimstone, and others are more caring, like a grandfather. And then some of them are kind of spacey out there, I said pathetic, but the prophetic, like prophecy, and God's talking to them on the fly and they're jumping around. Anyway, pick the style that works for you. Pick the topics that work for your audience. Find some place to meet in the middle. And this does mean that you need to be consistent about your delivery. So that's why it's important to be yourself. If you need some practice in this, join Toastmasters. Do a podcast. Do regular interviews. I learned to speak slower when I was doing interviews with, of course, famous people. They want to be heard, so you need to slow the pace down and you need to listen more than you talk. I could go on to this quite a while because it's a valuable topic. The better you can communicate clearly with your audience, the more likely they are to comply with your request or to receive the information which they've asked for. If you have any questions about clear communications, visit us at www.adbriefings.co.uk. I'm Justin Hitt with Ad Briefings. I'm the publisher and the producer of this newsletter that helps copywriters, marketers, and business development professionals transform business relationships into profits using words that sell. Thanks for listening.